Our next speaker you may or may not know. He's someone who describes what he does as bringing peace through commerce. I like to call him the prophet of the circular economy. And he will tell you all about that. Bill McDonough.
Thank you, Vanessa. Today I'd like to talk about what we say, what we see, and I've been hearing people talking, and I've been having images of what the work is, and I'd like to drill down and look at the molecules and then drill back out and look at our legacies. So when we think about a language, it comes from what we see. So first we change the way we see. We peel off history. We imagine like a child what the world is before we have human artifice, and we start to see what we see. On the left here is how we see this flower. On the right is how it's seen by a honeybee. So how we see matters. Then we can change the words we use to describe what we see. So if we see something like clothing, what do we see? We see objects. We see gowns, caps, pants, shoes. What do you say about that? Well, what if you're an eco-toxicologist? This is what you see. This is what you say. So we now have the tools to see this deeply, and we have the language and the methods to communicate this quickly and everywhere. So why do we care? Do we care because we say it, or do we care because it actually matters to us? Matter matters. And how could something be beautiful if it damages children's health or destroys the environment? What is beautiful? And when we think about the ideas of scarcity, we realize that in markets, often it's the creation of the perception of scarcity where none exists, when actually it's a creation of a world of abundance of things that we might not even want to exist. Well, design, I'm a designer. I come from architecture and obviously sustainability, but when I won an important sustainability award many years ago, after the Earth Summit, the press came up and said, "Mr. Sustainable, what does it all mean?" And I said, well, I'm not that interested in sustainability, really. If I ask you what your relationship is to your spouse and you say, sustainable, I'd say, I'm sorry. This doesn't sound that exciting, really. We're looking for fecundity and joy as well as maintenance. So if design is the first signal of human intention, you wake up in the mornings with designs on the world, and I've heard this morning people's designs on the world of luxury. Well, then I'd have to ask the question, almost a Platonic question, is when you talk about, well, the environment or people and so on, well, let's be less bad. Well, is less bad being good? Or is it being bad by definition? Just less so. Are we confusing a human value with a numerical number? Less and more are Aristotelian. Good and bad are Platonic. So we call what we sell luxury goods. What if they're luxury bads? Oops. So let's make less bads and more goods. So I co-authored a book which is called Cradle to Cradle, and the idea is one thing's waste is another thing's food, that all these things are actually perpetual in a certain way. And there's this joy in the endlessness, in the legacy of it. And that we can make things and take things and remake them and restore things. And that isn't just a one-way take, make, waste. It's a take, make, retake, remake, restore. And the idea is not just to create heirlooms which have durable value, but to create legacies that have enhancing value. The shade of the tree we heard about that you sit under, the tree you planted that you'll never sit under, the shade might be the umbrage of a legacy you don't really want to see or to sit in. Wouldn't that be interesting? The shadow world. So the idea is to shine light and celebrate this, and to use the things that we have in science and art to make our lives better. Now, one of the first distinctions in Cradle to Cradle is there are fundamentally two metabolisms in the world. There's the one that Francis Crick identified with James Watson in 1953 when they discovered DNA. And when asked about what is life, what does it mean to be a living thing, Francis Crick, 9 years later, said, to be a living thing, you have to have growth. Because if you're not growing, you're dying. Anybody in business knows this. Growth. And to have growth, you have to have income. Of course, we all know that too. But in nature, income comes from the sun. And growth is related to biology. We are the negative entropy. If physics is equals mc squared and m is one hydrogen atom times c squared, then E is big enough to destroy a city in seconds. And we end up with entropy, chaos. You burn a log and watch the minerals, watch the water disperse. A law of physics, chaos. What is the opposite of the chaos? It is life itself. It is the log that you burned. It's the thing that aggregates complex and information and objects and energies like photons with carbon from the atmosphere into living organisms. And growth is good. But in order to have this, he also points out, you need an open metabolism of chemicals operating for the benefit of the organisms and their reproduction. An open system. So that we call biology. And one thing's waste is another thing's food. And we have what's known as life and life cycle. But humans in the last 5,000 years have invented another metabolism we call the technical metabolism. 5,000 years. And you know, we're not that smart really. If you think about it, I designed NASA's space station on Earth. And while we were working on it, we pointed out that humans went to the moon before they figured out they could put wheels on their luggage. So design humility is a very important idea, that we're not that smart, really. And when you think about it, if we design materials that are technical nutrients, they're actually goods as services. That's very interesting. You want to watch the television, not own 4,600 molecules or chemicals and heavy metals. You want to watch the thing. You want to watch TV. You want to wash your clothes. You want to get the light from the light fixture. You don't want to own indium and gallium. These can belong to the manufacturers. So there are two metabolisms. So we stop using terms like design for end of life because we might actually achieve it. We talk about products as if they have a life cycle. This is not a living thing. Your phone talks to you, but it's not alive. And so the idea of designing for end of use becomes interesting. So we design for next use. And it could be something as ephemeral as a leaf on the ground becoming soil safely, as I'll show you a T-shirt that can do this. Or it could be something as durable as products that are recyclable ad infinitum or heirlooms that you'd want to keep forever. So we've developed a scientific protocol to do this, and we call it Cradle to Cradle Certified, and at Cradle Institute, and this is now being adopted by a lot of people designing into biology or designing into technology and trying to keep them apart so we don't get what Jane Jacobs would call a monstrous hybrid. And so it's interesting to note, you're in luxury, but Walmart announced they're adopting Cradle to Cradle Certified as the first layer of verifiable chemistries and product quality 2 weeks ago. Home Depot did it then. And so all of a sudden, at that end of the world, we're seeing it coming because people care about these things. So it's the search for the good. Good materials, good economy, good energy, good water, and good lives. And how would we look at that? What is good? Ask a child. Design for 8-year-olds, and you get good answers. If you try and explain to them that less bad is not being good, or it is good, they say, what are you talking about? Less bad is good? It's confusing. These are double negatives. So good materials would be safe, healthy, biological, and technical nutrients. They would get that. Good economies are circular. We do it again and again. But being circular would not be a good in itself if you made bads, because then we'd be circulating bads again and again. That would be worse, you see? So circular is not a good per se. And then we want to share and share. Be sharing with things so we use them more effectively and efficiently, and we also want to share them with larger groups of people, of course. Good energy would be clean and renewable, so we do that. Good water, ask a child. Clean water is good, dirty water is bad. But it also has to be available to every single child. We've developed textiles where the water coming out of the mills is evaporated only, 10%. There is no poison. We did a mill in Switzerland. Well, the water coming out is clean enough to drink. It's as good quality as Swiss drinking water. Why not? You can do this. And so all of a sudden we realize this is the way we work. The world gets better because we're here. And as a result, you're supporting lives that are safe, they have dignity, and they allow children to be creative. So we put this into a program with the C&A Foundation called Fashion for Good. It's located, the center's in Amsterdam. But the place is a place where people can come and share information and share research, share innovation, and say, these are the things we want. How do we get these invested in? How do we all agree that certain things we do together? Don't forget that the word competition came from the Greek city-states stopping fighting and going and creating the Olympics so they could all get fit together. Somebody wins, nobody dies, and everyone gets fit together. This is the Olympics. This is competition's root. So in a very modest level, we've created a T-shirt here, C&A did this, with Fashion for Good, where all of the materials were assessed for ecological and human health. 100% of the molecules of that little T-shirt have been assessed for ecological and human health, 100%. The mill is clean, the water is clean, the dyes are clean, the people are treated with dignity. It is 100% renewably powered. One of the mills is solar powered, the other mill is wind powered. The world gets better because you made something and gave it to the public, in this case, at the price points that are for mass market. Stella McCartney will be here soon. Stella has just gotten Cradle Gold certified for her wools. This is a beautiful story. This means that not only is it beautiful, it's deeply, deeply, deeply beautiful. And it will be beautiful forever. That is an amazing idea of an heirloom. And if we look at the most secretive in the fashion industry, for example, things, we see fragrance, which a lot of people have concern over, and now we have Cradle fragrances. Fragrances assessed for ecological and human health down to the very last molecule. So we move from undefined to defined systems because we can see. We move from obscurity, the shade of that tree, being something that we illuminate across time, and it becomes transparent. We move from shallow transparencies to deep transparency. We move from derivative to authentic, and I appreciated the concern over the word authentic. Right now, I remember noticing that the financial markets in the world are 92% of them are derivative. Only, if you add up all the GDPs in the world, they're only 8% of the financial markets. The real stuff is this tiny piece of the world. Imagine that. So precious, so important, so authentic. We move from just having this artificial intelligence of statistical significance to having a deep natural intelligence about what does nature tell us about the world and how we live here. What would that intelligence do as we give values to the tools? Because remember, artificial intelligence, the word artifice is critical. The value of a tool is put there by the intention of the user. If I give someone a hammer, if I give it to a child, it becomes a toy. If I give it to a carpenter, it becomes your house. If I give it to a maniac, it becomes a weapon. The hammer is innocent. It is the intention of the user. So let us have these good intentions. And let's bring nature into the mix because that is our context. It is the protocol. Let's move from crude excess, where we celebrate an abundance of unknown things that may have damage, to an exquisite excess of the intelligence of beauty, heritage, as we've heard, and talk about, let's share that and have more of it, which might be a little ironic when you're looking for scarcity. It's because we're moving scarcity to abundance, but it doesn't mean you can't have special things. It doesn't mean you can't have heirlooms. But it does mean we have to go beyond being smart to being wise. We have to move from this generation to all generations in our intelligence. And so we move from a kind of timeful mindlessness, I'm in a hurry and I really don't want to think about it, I'll pretend maybe, to a kind of mindful timelessness. Like we can think about these things. They can underpin what we do. They can be the principles on which we base our business so that when people come to us, as we heard this morning, that they can come to your company and you say, this is what we think about. These are our principles. This is the fulcrum that Archimedes talked about. This is the thing against which we lean the levers of commerce and change so that we can leverage the world up and make it better. Because if you don't have a fulcrum, all you have is a lever and a place to stand. All you can do is push the earth over a cliff or poke a hole in it because you're not going to get any lift. In order to have lift, you need principles. So we move from a kind of selfish luxury to one of generous luxury. And we move from planned obsolescence and churn, which is an ironic part of all this, to an endless resourcefulness. So you can have rare and special things, but they're based on an heirloom notion, but with a legacy of understanding, so that the world got better because you're here. The river was cleaned up because you're here, not polluted a little less. It's actually making the world better. So that's what I wanted to talk about, luxury for better. How do we make the world better because we're here? And this is a kind of practical wisdom, the wisdom and then how to act. We know that a manager's job is to be efficient and do something the right way, but it's the executive's job to do the right thing. Because what if you're doing the wrong thing? And what if you're doing it perfectly? You become perfectly wrong. So the question becomes, what is the right thing to do? So if we just tell the world that we're going to be less bad and our goal is nothing, tell the children our goal is nothing. And you're making it difficult for me. I have to clothe and feed you. Oh, wait a minute. So that's not going to work. So what we really don't want to say is our goal is nothing. And then if you just say, I'm going to reduce my carbon by 20% by 2020, then what you're saying is, I'm going to be less bad and 20%. Think about that for a minute. You're telling the world what you're not going to do. This is like saying to a taxi driver, quick, I'm not going to the airport. Is this really helpful? So don't tell us what you're not going to do. Tell us what you're going to do. Because think about this. Carbon, for example, in the atmosphere is now a toxin. A toxin is a material at the wrong dose and duration in the wrong place. Water is highly toxic if I surround you with it for 6 minutes. Wrong dose, wrong duration. If you jump out of an airplane over the ocean, hit the water at terminal velocity, it's a very big dose, very short duration. Highly toxic. So context matters. But we don't go out to the children of Flint, Michigan and say, well, we're going to reduce the lead in your water by 20% by 2020. People go to jail for doing this. Carbon in the atmosphere is a toxin. We don't go to kids in Flint, Michigan and say, we're going to reduce the lead in the water in Brussels equal to that you have here in your water, so you're going to be lead neutral. When we go try and make the world better, you make it better for everyone, and you use science. And it's dignified, and it's hopeful, because the children can understand this. So take what we don't want, put it below the line in the bad category. Go ahead, it's called human values. Put what we do want in the positive column, and then do the both. Remove the bad and bring in the good, and do science. Do the inventory of what you're doing and your choices. Put them through your human filters of good and bad. Filter them into the columns and get to work. And this becomes continuous improvement. It becomes an innovation engine. And you're moving from values to value creation. Because what happens in so much business, like on the left, you start with number, and you can get to metrics, tactics, goals, strategies, and make your numbers. But you can't get to your values from there. The right and the wrong, if you start with what you think is good and bad, you can go to principles of behavior. That's that fulcrum. That's that thing that you can use to answer questions. This is what we believe. This is what we see, our visions, and I do that for a living. Visions are what I do. I design things. And I know full well that my visions are hallucination unless they get executed. And those set our goals, and let's use the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's use goals like how do we love all the children of all species for all time as a way of thinking about the future. Move to our strategies, tactics, our metrics, and then show the value creation. You all know how to do that. You have incredibly valuable companies, incredibly valuable work, but it comes from your values first. And so in Maslow's hierarchy, we should take care of everyone's need. We should try to serve all the things that the children and the people want. And then you get to work, especially in the area of let's find those things that we love. And so if we can do that, we are working towards a new language of luxury. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was pretty much a lot to think about and take in. I have one question, and then we'll briefly go to the audience, because I think it's we've got a lot to go over before lunch. What does this mean practically for a luxury brand if you're creating something that goes cradle to cradle? You know, say you've got a jacket. You certify it in all the best ways. You make sure all your molecules are good. You sell it. It leaves the store. You lose track of it. How do you know everything is fine? How do you know you're actually doing good?
That's a great point. And that actually is the big question now. We have a very strong ability to focus on the objects themselves. We have a very weak system of putting it into continuous reuse. So that we're seeing that in packaging, especially, for example. Most of the packaging in the world today is not designed for recycling at all. And so it's a crisis. It's ending up everywhere and needs to be organized. In clothing, what we're seeing is, certainly on fast fashion, we're already seeing companies like C.E.O. that are in the stores collecting clothing, which is fine. Those kinds of things are sort of a toe in the water on this. But I think if you design things, for example, with the biological technical distinction, you end up with sort of natural materials in category, you end up with technical materials like polyesters in another category. You realize that if you put them together, we're going to need systems to know how to take them apart if we're going to keep doing that. So we're starting to see the development of those systems too. But unless you have the vision for it, you can't design into the system. But your question is well taken. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like Leibniz said, if it is possible, therefore it exists. So that's the world I live in. See, when I thought, can you imagine Walmart adopting this? It took 26 years.
That's a long time.
And I just thought it was possible. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Now it exists. So this is, a 30-year overnight sensation. So the idea that we would be able to take these materials and use them again is a dream, but it's a worthy one.
Okay, anyone have one question? One lucky person who gets to ask a question for Bill? You guys are all really hungry and you're just like, ooh, gotta get to lunch.
Hello. I've been following your work since you published the book. Could you give us some measures? How much of the fashion industry is already working in a circular or cyclical way? And how could it improve over the next few years?
I really wouldn't know how to answer that question in a precise way. I'd say it's very small, extremely small. We could probably quantify how small it is, but let's just say it's really small. But the conversation is now getting into the very large. So when we see fast fashion, for example, I was talking to a company the other day. They have 11,000 factories fed by 60,000 factories, and there are 60 million people engaged in their supply chain. So all of a sudden, very little things can become very large things if we get this right. And I think when you look at the dye stuffs, for example, the fact that we've been able to work with the big dye companies and get these cradle-to-cradle dyes that are now available to people, and we can articulate that, all of a sudden they're doing it because it's fabulous for their business. And all of a sudden you have access to this. So until you have access to it, it's hard to use. And so I think this is one of those moments where this will now blossom because it will become available. And once it's available, you can do it cost effectively. So I'd say it's very small right now and hopefully will become normal soon.
I think that's a good and positive way to end this. I wish we could talk more, but I promise you I will never say my relationship with my husband is sustainable. Thank you.